start creating these component beers, which is how mostly started for it's what spawned the anniversary. But these came out of a barrel program where we were doing strong ale back in the 1995 when Firestone finally decided they wanted to get into brewing. And coming from the wine industry, they wanted to do something unusual. They figured, well, we got all these barrels, let's use them. And I spent a good part of that year trying to convince them not to use those barrels because they were wine barrels that had previously had wine in them, which means that they probably had bugs that, while impervious to wine, certainly would wreak havoc on beer. So my job was they said, well, fine, figure out a way to do this. And I'd always been intrigued by a British system called the Burton Union. And if you're familiar with that, there's actually still one brewery that uses it, but in Burton-upon-Trent, which is traditionally one of the great brewing centers of Europe and the world, they use the system there. It's one of the secrets. The water and the Union were considered the secret to this incredibly crisp, clean beer for its time. So adopted something along those lines. We tweaked it a little bit to meet our needs. While that system was really designed to harvest yeast, we considered it a fifth ingredient. We wanted oak character. And so once we figured out on that system what kind of toasted oak we wanted, which was medium toasted, American versus French, American, and only using clean barrels. So new barrels would come through it and pass through the system. We never used anything that, in this case, we were trying to create clean beer. Because in 1995, if you had proposed making a sour beer, or even mistakenly made a sour beer, you were done. So interesting. So created that, and then created a beer to go along with it, which was a British pale ale called DDBA. And so that's how that came, and that really unwittingly started our whole barrel program. I mean, we did this very traditional, and we've always been steeped in that. We really love beer tradition. We try not to forget where we came from, even though we may not practice. Most breweries don't practice a lot of things going back a couple hundred years. We didn't get the memo. We did. We practiced this very traditional system from the 19th century. We've certainly moved forward into our other brewing program, which Matt Brindleson is the brainchild of, our brewmaster, and that's the spirits barrel program, which we're going to dive into today. That started literally in 2005, and we created these high gravity beers to create this anniversary beer, our 10th anniversary in 2006, and it did so well that we've been doing it ever since, and that has grown. And in 2007, we started messing around with wild beer, or what we sometimes call sour beers. And that was a game of cat and mouse because that really was flying under the radar. So it was always like moving those barrels away from the owners so they could never catch up with it. For the obvious reasons. Again, we tried to avoid that in '96, but that's how that got started. Developed a following because we do small events. And now we have a whole other facility for that, which I can go into later called Barrelworks. But I'm in charge of that program, which really, and it's sort of ironic that I was brought on to clean up what was going on in the barrels, and now I'm overseeing all the sour beers that are going into them. So in bourbon country, they have to use new barrels, and they have to get rid of them in about, and what I found was a remarkable statistic is about 80% of the world's cooperage originated probably in Kentucky, maybe Tennessee, and used for various reasons. So they're always trying to move barrels. Although not always easy to get. But we have somebody who sources these. What we're looking for, which doesn't mean we always get it, is something that a premium bourbon or whiskey that has spent more than sort of the requisite 5 years. We're really looking at something hopefully longer. So we have some Pappy Van Winkle, Heaven Hills, an example. Fitzgerald.
Are those harder to get from your competition with the brewers?
Well, it's becoming more competition now. That wasn't always the case, But then, of course, we weren't asking for as many either when we first started this. So, can we have 8 barrels? Sure. Now we're saying, can we have 400 barrels? Well, you can have 200 of these, and so we have to source that. But that's okay. Part of the mystery here is not just having one type, is that we put these in barrels, and each barrel has its own unique character, but ultimately we blend. And like I said, we talk about how at Firestone we have this obsession with barrels, but I think we're equally obsessed with blending. I mean, Double Barrel Ale was a blend of barrel fermented with stainless steel. I could go on about a lot of the beers here and how they're blends, 2 different yeasts, 2 different beers, you name it. So it's something we've always been interested in. And here, it becomes a very high art form in this case, is that we have these different barrels. Even within the same beer, they're different, and then we have different beers, and we have to sit down and come up with something like 16 that's, hopefully going to hit it out of the park. Along those lines, just to give you a scenario, be almost similar to this, is when we do 16. So as brewers, we make the beer, we put it in barrels, and other than taking it back out of the barrels, our job is done. For the blending, while I get to sit in on that, my opinion doesn't count. Is that we turn this over to our winemaking friends who have vast experience in blending. They understand nuance, they understand a lot of things. I like to say as brewers, if you look at kind of the beers that are exciting people these days, they have exclamation points. Bitter, or full body, high alcohol. The winemakers tend to understand nuance a little bit more, how to put those pieces together, and so we learn a lot from them. So we'll sit down on a day, usually August. It kind of starts off pretty loose, but people settle in. Like here, you basically form teams, 2 to 3 people. The number of barrels and different types of beers that we can use are up on a chalkboard, and how much of it we have. So if we have 400 barrels of this, but only 10 barrels of that, obviously we can't, even though that's something maybe somebody would love to focus on, that's all we have. And people will go through the different components, make notes, and boom, people start to, it's like a little science project. People start to blend, make notes, and it takes a while, but basically at some point everyone has to submit a recipe. And it goes off, that recipe is formed, 6 to 7 beers come out of that, and we blindly taste it by consensus, we pick it. And the remarkable thing is the people who picked, the 2 winemakers who picked 15 also got made 16 as well, which much to the chagrin of the other winemakers, they were not. One guy just kept going, recount! I want to recount! But I think they've done a pretty good job. Focus on our spirits barrel program, and this beer, among most of these, some of the beers you're going to have tonight actually have their own bottling, others are just components, and it's a real treat to get those because we don't have a lot of those. They don't get very far out of the brewery, and so a real treat to have some of those here tonight. Velvet Merkin, which is interesting, because we have a Velvet Merlin, which is a little different. It doesn't spend any time aging in barrels. But the good news about this one is we're going to start bottling this in the fall, which to me is really exciting. But so Velvet Merkin is a traditional oatmeal stout. Why does one add oatmeal to stout? Why not? But basically, that was something. Oatmeal tends to add some viscosity to the beer, which lends a creaminess. So it's more about texture and mouthfeel. If you've had the Merlin alone, you get that. You definitely get that. It's also here, but this spends up to 12 months in spirits barrels, mainly bourbon. Could be some brandy in there, and picks up this wonderful kind of nutty vanilla, sort of whiskey flavor, and it really transforms this beer. In one way, it transforms it because it actually pulls alcohol out of the barrels. This goes from a 5.5% alcohol beer to, in this case, 8.7, which is quite a pickup. Usually it's about 1, maybe 2%. And it just adds some complexity to the nose. So if you warm this up, go ahead, get your nose in there. So this is, the reason I start this is because 16 has 8 different beers, 7 of which are barrel aged or gone through our spirits barrel program, 1 that has not. And that's often the case. So there's usually somebody likes to throw in something like last year it was Double Jack, this year it's Wookey Jack. It's one of the components that was stainless steel. But it gives some oomph to the beer, a little hop, quality. But this, there's 8 beers, but there's really 3 main that form about 60, a little over 60% of the blend here. And Velvet Merkin is one of them. It's roughly about 23%. The other 2, we have one of them here, which is double DDBA. The other one is Sticky Monkey, which unfortunately we didn't have. And those three really are sort of are the base for this beer. So I thought, starting here, this was about 23, which is the highest percentage beer in 16. So, you know, again, good vanilla here. I don't know, pick up a little nutty. And this is about 8.7% alcohol. It's actually the lowest. No, it's not true. Wookey Jack might be there. Wookey Jack, are, you know, roughly in the 8s. Yeah, Wookey Jack's 8.3. Those are the lowest ones in it. So, as it stands up, you know, this would over time probably not stand up to time as well as it will. This is unique because there's two programs involved here. This is selectively fermented in our union, our Firestone Union. So it's fermented in American medium toasted oak, and then it is aged in retired Union barrels. So it spends time aging, and not in a bourbon barrel, but American toasted oak. So what I get here, I would say you, because I don't want to tell you what you guys are tasting, but what I get is there's an oak dryness, there's really an oak, almost more component oak than mature, kind of oxidized oak when it starts to go through a lot of changes. But it's, because this is a big beer, I mean, this one came in like 14.2%, it's a whopper. And, you know, big gravity beer is I get a lot of toffee and caramel in this. And then it's just got a nice, you know, kind of nutty alcohol. Chestnut, that was a good one. But there's definitely a fruitiness to this. And this is it's great on its own, but this is an excellent blending, which is, you know, like I said, it's 20% of 16. For a reason, it blends really well.
Yeah.
It adds a really nice foundation. Blending is an art. It's time, and we're still learning it. I mean, if you go to like cognac or in the wine country, champagne country, or even in the lambic country, the guy who's probably most revered is the person who's just spent the last 25 years, probably spent 10 learning, you know, through an apprenticeship or something, takes over for the old guy, and then he becomes an old guy and does the same thing. One, having a palate, I mean, understanding the flavors, and then just having an idea, I mean, and even like as a chef would, of you know, what do you think is going to work together? And again, the winemakers really have taught us well on how to create nuances. There's certain of these components that they really love that to us probably at first glance would not have, I mean, this is one of them. This is a bit more, you know, it doesn't have the big booziness, as much as they like that. This is more of a caramel component. The other one is Helldorado, which we'll try, which is a really unique beer.